Well, it's great to be here today and my WebEx, and I have a lot of things to talk about today. I am a professor of animal science at Colorado State University, and I had no speech till age 4. So I was definitely an autistic kid, and when I was 3 years old, I looked really severe. And I understand that we've got teachers here from preschool all the way up to community college, so a really big range of teachers. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. I got really good early intervention. I was in speech therapy by age 2.5. And in my little speech therapy school that 2 teachers taught out of their home, there was a lot of emphasis on turn taking, how to wait and take turns. Really important thing for these kids to learn is turn taking. The other thing my speech teacher did is she would slow down when she talked to me. She'd slow down and she'd hold up a cup and she'd go cup and then she'd go cup, pa, saying it slow. It's really important to slow down because when the grown-ups talked fast, it just went into gibberish. And when they talked slowly, I could hear them. Now, this was 1949 when I would have been taken into the doctor. I went into neurologist. They tested me for hearing, which I was not deaf. But when people talked fast, I could not hear the auditory detail. So really, really good early intervention. And then I went to great little small school. And one of the things in the 50s, they used a method I call teachable moments for teaching social skills. All children were taught social skills in the 50s. And so if we were sitting at the dining room table and let's say I decided to stir my drink with my finger, mother didn't scream no, she'd say use the spoon. She'd give the instructions. If I reached across the table to get the mashed potato serving dish, she would say ask your sister to pass it. She would give the instruction. That's the thing that's really important. She would give me the instruction. I call that a teachable moment. You explain to the child what they should do. Now, my first slide right there shows my book, The Outdoor Scientist. And I worked with Betsy Lerner on this book really recently. Because when I was a child, we went outside and we did things. My sister and I had rock collections. I did lots of things, making kites, making snowflakes. It's my book, Calling All Minds. Have my childhood bird kites in that. And I would spend hours figuring out how to make a bird kite. You know, kids today are not doing hands-on things. They're terrified to make a mistake. And I think some of the problem is they're removed from the world of practical things. When I was in school, I had sewing, I had woodworking, I had art. If I had not had those classes, I would have absolutely, totally hated school. Now, we got to get kids off the devices, get them out doing things. And I know if you're having to do classes on Zoom or whatever, you can't do that. But I'm seeing too many kids with an autism label getting addicted to video games. Another issue with autism is it's a huge, huge, huge spectrum. Here is a very famous person who's on the autism spectrum, Elon Musk. And these Post-it notes were put in here, I think it was about 6 years ago when this book got published. I knew he was autistic, but now I can say it. So at one end of the spectrum, you got Elon Musk, and at the other end of the spectrum, you got someone with much more severe challenges that cannot dress themselves. Now we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some top innovators today if they were brought up in today's educational system? This is the thing I want to really ask. What would happen to them? Einstein, I'm sure, would land in an autism class today because he had no speech until age 3. A lot of them had unconventional paths. I'm worried that today they might be less successful. You know, this is the issue. Let's go to the next slide. I have grandparents coming up to me all the time, and they discover that they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. Now, this would be a grandfather that probably didn't have any speech delay or just a minor speech delay. Half of the programmers out in Silicon Valley are probably on the autism spectrum. Most of these had good careers. Now, where a diagnosis can be helpful, let's say for the community college level or maybe seniors in high school, is help them with relationships. It can give them insight into relationships. But one of the problems I'm seeing today is I'm seeing too many parents baby their kids too much, coddle them. I'm seeing smart, verbal 16-year-olds that have never gone shopping, 12-year-olds that have never gone shopping. The mom is afraid to let go for something as innocent as shopping. And I've gotten some of these fixed. So I was at an airport one time, and mom came up with her 12-year-old, fully verbal, and there was a newsstand across the hall from the gate room we were in, and I gave her a $5 bill, and I said, go in that store and buy something. And she went and bought a drink and brought me back the change. It was the first time she had shopped. Kids are not learning these really, really basic things. But an older kid where their relationships with other teens is terrible, that's where the label might give them insight. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of friends through shared interests. This is really important. Friends through shared interests. I got bullied and teased in high school, and the only place I was not bullied and teased was horseback riding, model rocket club, and electronics. Friends through shared interests. Really, really important. Let's go to the next slide. Well, I'm a big NASA geek. I worship the astronauts. It's amazing what we did over 50 years ago, our generation did. We got things done. And I get very, very emotional about this. Now, the thing is, some people think, well, autistic people don't have any emotions. Yes, I've got emotions. But I get emotional about really, really interesting stuff that gets done. It's really just such a cool trip going to the moon. So we'll go on to the next slide. And I got to visit Cape Kennedy. This was about 4 years ago. I went to the vehicle assembly building. I got inside and I got to see a SpaceX launch. I even got up on the roof. I wasn't supposed to be on the roof, but that was really cool. Getting out and seeing the place where my generation did one of the greatest things was ever done. Let's go to the next slide. And the thing that I've learned in a lot of these things is maybe the right stuff rides the rockets, but the kids that are different build the stuff. This is a brand new launch pad. It's 4 years old. I visited it 4 years ago when it was just finishing up construction. And the person who was in charge of that project had Tourette's syndrome. Now, what would happen to that guy today? This is what worries me. I think he'd be in the basement playing video games. That's why we got to get the kids off the video games. Because these kids that are playing all these video games, they're not becoming video game designers. What I'm seeing with too many fully verbal labeled autistic, you've got two paths in life. You can go to the basement or the bedroom to play video games, stay in your room, or get out and get a life. And my mother had a very good sense of how to stretch me just outside my comfort zone, not throw me in the deep end of the pool, not push me into something with too much noise overload and multitasking, but how to stretch and give limited choices. She had a very, very good instinct on this. Let's go to the next slide. This is the single most important slide I've got to show you, and that is the different kinds of minds. I am what's called an object visualizer. Everything is pictures. Everything I think about is pictures. Absolutely cannot do algebra. I have never passed an algebra class. I don't even know if I could graduate from high school today. But I've done a lot of things. I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody that they thought was mentally retarded. And I get asked all the time, what motivated me? I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. That was a very, very, very big motivator. I'm going to prove to them that I can do it. And I managed to get out of algebra because in '67, when I took college freshman math, algebra wasn't the required class. It was finite math, which was probability, matrices, and statistics. And with a lot of tutoring, I managed to get through it. And I went to the math teacher and asked for help. A big mistake a lot of students make, and I've seen this as a college professor, is you mess up a course, the student doesn't ask for help soon enough. I asked for help on the very first math quiz that was failed. Then when I got my master's, I had another graduate student tutor me. I had to be tutored in math. Wobbled through it with a C as in Charlie, but I got through it. Another kind of thinker is the visual spatial pattern thinker. This is your mathematician. Now, if you're wondering if this is really true, in my book, The Autistic Brain, it was published in 2013, I've actually got scientific references in here on these different kinds of thinking. And since that book's been published, I've looked up many, many, many more references, and I'm finding even more data that shows that these different kinds of thinkers really are real. And if you want to look this stuff up, you need to use these keywords that I have highlighted here in red. Object visualizer, that's me, and the HBO movie shows how I think in pictures, and spatial visualizer, spatial visualizer. You've got to use those keywords. Now, there's a lot of studies that will look at visual spatial thinking and verbal thinking and find there's a difference. But there's actually three kinds, and a lot of studies merge these together and it's wrong. Then you have your verbal person. Education is run by the verbal people. Now, there's another really interesting difference in thinking. I'm what's called a bottom-up thinker. Everything is thought about in specific examples. Verbal thinkers have a big, broad theory. Okay, we got to have an inclusive classroom. Okay, but how do we implement it? The verbal mind takes out detail. The visual thinking mind and the mathematical mind may put in too much detail. And what I have found is they both need to work together. But the first step is realizing that they are different. So object visualizer, spatial visualizer, and verbal thinker. And I am concerned that our educational system is screening out the object visualizers. And I'm going to be talking more about why we need these kind of thinkers. And my mother always developed my strengths. I was good at art. Build on the child's strengths. You have a child that's good at math, give them harder math. And for these little math kids, give them the old-fashioned algebra book. That's a book I'd use for a doorstop. But the old-fashioned algebra book that's all numbers, give that to the math kid. Not the stuff you're doing now. Give them the old algebra book. Dig it out of the attic. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. And I forgot to mention that there can be mixtures of the different kinds of minds. Now, it's been really interesting as far as our moon landing goes. It's now over 50 years ago. Here are two mathematicians that were mission critical, single people, mission critical. Katherine Johnson, the black lady. I didn't even know that she existed until I saw the movie, a wonderful movie that was done about her. And she calculated by hand all the suborbital flights. And if that had been done wrong, they would have either burned up in space or they would have skipped off into outer space and died when their air ran out. Absolutely mission critical. Now, there was one thing that was done right with Katherine Johnson, and I had to dig to find it. When she was a little girl, they advanced her math. She was given advanced math training. And another mission critical person was an algebra specialist. Algebra was his fun. He lived in a messy office at MIT. And he says he admitted, I didn't do any of the work. And he did some algebra equations just for play, gave them to the programmers. And those algebra equations were mission critical because the computer was really primitive. You basically had this box the size of a large airline carry-on bag. I think it weighed about 60 pounds. Very primitive computer stuff, probably 1/100th of your phone's computer power. And he had to get the lunar lander to land with that little tiny bit of memory. And the algebra equations made that possible. The first moon landing probably would have either crashed or been aborted if we didn't have Hal Laning's equations, mission critical. These are the people that are different. Hal Laning, good chance he had some autistic traits. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's thank the visual thinkers over at Playtex. 10 years ago, a book came out called Spacesuit. And it became revealed that the Playtex company had made the original moon suit. I don't think the guys could stand the thought of the Playtex living spacesuit, but that's what it was, sewn by the finest bra seamstresses. And their boss was a former TV repairman, not an engineer. He used to fight with the NASA engineers, but absolutely mission critical. You know, those one of the seamstresses used to cry every night because of the responsibility. she was afraid the suit would rip if she didn't make it right. She realized how responsible that was. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's give credit to some of the probably non-mathematical people involved with Perseverance. These are the cameras that are up on Mars right now, taking all these gorgeous pictures. You can see the pocket knife next to the cameras. They're not very big. Somebody made those on a workbench. The mathematician gets it there. My kind of mind probably did all that lovely wiring that's on top. That's mission critical. Doesn't get enough credit. You see, you need both the mathematician and visual thinker, to pull this mission off. Let's go to the next slide. There's a beautiful picture, and we can go on to the next slide. Now, my grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes, and he worked with another guy that probably had Asperger's, which they've phased that term out now, and that's simply socially awkward with no speech delay. That's now merged into the bigger autism spectrum. And one of the problems we've got with the verbal thinkers is they overgeneralize. Elon Musk needs a very different kind of situation in school than somebody who's nonverbal. But you see, it has the same label. So my grandfather met up with this guy that came up with this weird idea for these 3 little coils. Oh, aviation people thought it was just stupid. They said, well, you're not supposed to work with compasses. We're going to wire the plane's controls up to the magnetic compass. Well, what happens? The plane just goes like this. You've seen what a magnetic compass does. And they worked for years in a loft over where they fixed trains. They finally got it to work. They were lousy business people. It got ripped off. And the rip-off flew in every plane during World War II. They were not good business people. Finally, at the end of the war, my grandfather did get a decent contract. But these were 2 different kinds of people working together. MIT-trained mathematical engineer and the guy that came up with the crazy idea that what worked. Let's go to the next slide. Michelangelo dropped out of school at age 12. What happened to little Michael today? He'd probably be in the bedroom playing video games all day. That's what would happen to him today. But after he dropped out of school, and his dad was not happy, he did not want to study Latin. He did not want to become a lawyer. Ugh. He wanted to go to where all the churches were making art and go look at art. But the other thing is he was exposed to stone cutting tools. Really important, because that's what he used. We've got kids today growing up totally removed from the world of practical things. One of the projects that's in my Calling All Minds is a little paper snowflake. And I had a teacher ask me, what would happen to the kid's self-esteem if the paper snowflake fell apart? I go, you got another piece of paper and you make another one. And when I did a book signing for Calling All Minds 4 years ago, 20 or 30% of the kids in Colorado, right outside of Denver, had never made a paper airplane. So you're growing up totally removed from the world of practical. I think this is a really, really serious issue. Let's go to the next slide. Steve Jobs, bullied in school, loved calligraphy. There was a quote in an educational magazine about the connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanity classes like calligraphy should not be overlooked. Einstein was playing the violin, music and math, that often goes together. Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison, hyperactive adult high school dropout, learned how to work at an early age. This is another thing. Kids need to learn how to work at an early age. Those granddads I talked to you about had paper routes when they were 11. We need to be finding substitutes for this. Chores for little kids, volunteer jobs when they're like 11, maybe at a church, a community center. The other thing is little entrepreneur things. My sister and I, when I was about 10 and she was about 8, we had a disastrous Kool-Aid stand, and we ran out of sugar. Well, we learned an important lesson from that. Talking to people, collecting money for charity, door to door. These were all things that taught work skills. No, this transition to work needs to happen early. And I'm seeing, again, too babied. let's get them out, get a real job as soon as they're legal. But what you got to do is don't put them in multitasking. I can't multitask. Don't put me on the busy McDonald's takeout window. Something calmer, maybe office supply store. I learn every feature of every printer, and it's quiet, and people are going to appreciate my knowledge of printers. That'd be a much better choice for a job. Let's go to the next slide. Schools need to be putting these classes back in. This varies a lot by state. Art, sewing. Took cooking, hated it, but I loved art and sewing. I was exposed to piano lessons and to a little flute. I was not good at that, but I was exposed to that, where another kid's going to take off with that. But how are you going to know whether you're going to play musical instruments if you never try them? Woodworking, theater. I didn't care about acting in the play, but I loved making costumes and sets. That's something that can turn into a career. Welding. I've worked in the cattle industry many years on designing facilities. I've worked with welders. They took a single welding class in college, not in college, high school, went out and started a business. I think it's great the community colleges are teaching these classes, but it's almost too late. We need to be hooking kids younger on a lot of these. Auto shop. Now, auto shop, that's my kind of mind. There have been 3 successful wean-offs from video games. These are young adults with auto shop, and they found that cars were more interesting than video games. No, we need to be putting these classes back in. And some states are already doing that. Let me go to the next slide. So how do you figure out what kind of a thinker a kid is? Well, I was really good at art. But if you don't have art in your school, how would you find out if the kid is good at art? Just the other day, I saw a beautiful train that a young adult had made with Legos, not from a kit. And no one had thought to introduce tools. We got kids growing up today that have never used tools. I was using tools in 2nd grade. Pliers, hammer, and screwdriver. I was using those things. I was taught how to use them safely. Mathematical kids. You got a kid that's good at mathematics? Introduce programming. And your verbal autistic kids, they often love facts, often love history. I want to talk a little bit right now about sensory problems in autism. They are real. So one child screams and the school bell goes off. Another child can't stand the sound of a hairdryer. Sometimes a child can learn to tolerate that sound if they control it. There was one successful case where a child was terrified of the buzzer on the gym. So they took him down to the gym when nobody was there and let him turn on the buzzer. And he started playing tunes on it. So when the child can control it. Now, sometimes you use headphones. But the problem is, if you use headphones all the time, the brain gets more sensitive. But you want to give the kid control. You can say you can have the headphones with you, but you want to try not to wear them. Have them with you. Try not to wear them. Give them control. And then put them on just for noisy things. The other day, I was out where where a lot of kids were around some playground equipment, and a little autistic kid wanted to go home. And I said to the mother, just take him out to the end of the field where it'd be quiet, we can have a break. And then he started playing with another kid. He just needed a little bit of time to take a break. Let's go to the next slide. You got to expose kids to careers, and we got a huge shortage of skilled trades. On a plane just the other day, I watched that movie, Waiting for Superman, and it had an omission that really upset me. And it talked about where kids go. Oh, CEOs, lawyers, doctors, that's the top. Managers, accountants. Okay, and then the ones that fail, they might become farmers. That's kind of putting farmers down too low, and laborers. But the thing they forgot in that, what about the skilled trades? Electricians, heating and air conditioning, plumbers, welders that build things from scratch. Okay, they have this little thing, they load the little jets with at the airport made out of aluminum. It's called the KCI swing gate. And I looked at that. Somebody just made those in a shop. No machined parts on it. I'm going to track down and see who made that. People I worked with are all retiring. And yeah, they sold a whole bunch of those things to United Airlines. Some little shop made that. Yeah, you see, nothing's abstract for me. But the people are not starting the little shops. Math thinkers, they're your traditional engineers. Go to MIT, go to Stanford, computer science, physics. Okay, but the visual thinkers, me, you're screening this out. Things are going to fall apart. I've been looking up some of the stuff about how we can, reduce methane emissions off oil fields. So many times it's easy for the visual thinkers. This is easy, low-hanging fruit. We can fix that stuff. I actually looked up some of the equipment, and like, oh yeah, I've seen that valve before in a meat plant. And some of your verbal thinkers, they're good at things with record keeping, and they're good at things like specialized retail. Let's go to the next slide. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. That is why keeping these classes is important. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when you're weird, what I had to learn to sell my work and not myself. Sell my work. That's what I did. So I would show off my work. And I'll show the drawing here of some of my work. On the next slide. And that's one of my drawings. And when people saw my drawings, they really liked them. And I had a really important mentor out in industry, Jim the contractor. And he had seen my work. And I want to talk about the importance of mentors. It starts off with my speech teacher, my mother always pushing me, my third grade teacher who was concerned that I couldn't read. And so mother taught me with phonics, really, really simple. I looked up some of the stuff online about phonics, which, going complicated nonsense. I could sing my ABC song. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's where I got half your sounds. They're all long. She had me memorize my sounds. Then she'd get a book worth reading, and she stopped right in the interesting part, and then have me sound out my words. I went from no reading to sixth grade reading. Another kid's going to be a whole word. Don't mess them up with phonics. Let's go to the next slide. And that's the drawing right there that I used to sell my designs to Mr. Fielding, the head of Cargill, back in the late 80s. You show off things. That's one of my hand-done drawings. Got a little bit of computer corruption here on that drawing. And why would I put on there, you have to touch to perceive? When I watched the industry in the mid-90s switch from hand drafting to computer drafting, started seeing very, very weird mistakes on drawings. Like the center of the circle wasn't in the center of the circle. Now what I learned is that drawing had been made by somebody who had never built anything and had never drawn by hand. No, you got to do some of these things. Let's go to the next slide. That's one of the pictures that got sent to Mr. Fielding, is to show some of the things I designed. That's from the original project I did in the 70s. We can go to the next slide. I'm watching the time. I'll be done on time. I love the fact that the HBO movie Temple Grandin showed my projects. Absolutely, absolutely loved that. And there is a replica of the project that I did in the 70s. I'll go to the next slide. And that's my brochure. I simply showed clients my work. And of course, back when I was doing this, color stuff was too expensive. Let's go to the next slide. And that's one of the pictures that Mr. Fielding was sent. Basically, what you want is a 30-second wow. Now, I'm designing here steel and concrete work. Let's go to the next slide. And there's the original project from 1976. And we can go on to the next slide. Now, who builds these big plans? I went back to a whole bunch of jobs where I had spent considerable time on the job. The visual thinkers like me, there'll be a person labeled draftsman, and that person lays out the whole entire factory. And it's actually designing equipment too. That's what I call the clever engineering department. These people are all retired. Now we're going to be missing them big time. The math thinkers, they'll do the boilers and the refrigeration. My kind of mind never touched that stuff. We don't understand boilers and refrigeration. But what I want to show here is that you need the entire team to build this factory. And the visual thinkers are not getting replaced. Let's go to the next slide. 20% of the people I worked with on these large factories were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. I worked with 3 people that owned metal fabrication companies, ranging from tiny to huge, and selling their stuff around the world. Multiple patents, designing and building complex equipment. I know a guy, I call him Willy Wonka in stainless steel. He has this big factory. I got on a corporate jet, flew somewhere. I can't tell you. I signed an NDA. I can't tell you what Willy Wonka does. But we had an interesting discussion that he would have been every single label in the book. And he started out washing equipment. Then he started building it. Now he's got this big factory with all kinds of patented devices in it. I can tell you where he'd be today, playing video games. Let's go to the next slide. Everything you see in that picture is imported from a high-wage country. That's a state-of-the-art pork processing plant. That equipment's from Quebec and Holland. We are not making it. And I went into a state-of-the-art chicken plant. Everything inside that plant was from Holland. Now, the building wasn't, but everything inside it. We're losing skills. We're losing them. Let's go to the next slide. Went to the Steve Jobs Theater, structural glass walls. They are from Italy and Germany. And this goes back to where they kept their skilled trades. They don't stick their nose up at the skilled trades. I've worked with brilliant people on big, complicated projects. The carbon fiber roof is from Dubai. I stood in the middle of that. I screamed, we don't make it anymore. Let's go to the next slide. And that's the parachute of Perseverance taking a selfie landing on Mars. I tracked down the company that made the fabric. It was fabric came from the UK. They made the parachute here, but the fabric came from the United Kingdom, and it was woven on high-tech looms from Europe. I saw videos of inside the plant, and I got some equipment names off of some of the equipment. Let's go to the next slide. Visual thinkers, artificial intelligence, autism, ADHD, dyslexics. We tend to be bottom-up thinkers. Specific examples are put in categories to form concepts. It's a different approach to problem solving. I just did an ethics talk this morning on ethical decisions about doing surgery. Okay, let's say back surgeries on dogs. I said I'd start out putting the ones that really were necessary in one spreadsheet box, and the ones that I think were just ripping off the client, another spreadsheet box. And then I'm going to have another specific examples in the middle where it could be up for debate. Concepts are formed by putting specific examples into categories. Verbal thinkers overgeneralize. And I forgot to tell you one thing about dyslexic. There's some dyslexic kids that when they go to read, they see the print jiggle on the page. And if you print their homework on pale pastel colors, pale light blue, tan, or gray paper, it can help them to see because it will stop the print from jiggling. A child that has a visual processing problem may pass an eye exam and be terrified of escalators. Can't tell how to get on and off of them. And something as simple as colored paper might save their reading. Now, it doesn't explain all dyslexia. And you're going to say, well, it's not evidence-based. Well, you're talking colored paper here. It's totally safe. It takes me 15 minutes to try it. Might cost me $5 at the most. So I'm going to go ahead and try it. If something's expensive, possibly dangerous, or very time-consuming, then I need to have evidence-based. Now, the visual thinking mind sees detail. You see, in the verbal mind leaves out the detail. And I've done this similar talk with these same slides with a little different emphasis. A lot of big corporations, and they'll ask me, oh, how can we, get more diverse in our thinking? The first thing you have to realize is that different kinds of thinking actually exist. And a lot of people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. They're mixtures. And we'll go on to my last slide, and I think I'm going to be probably pretty much right on time. Tips for working with minds that are different. Do not overload working memory. I do not have working memory. If I was a computer, I'm an Intel 286 with the cloud for storage, for memory storage. Give a child that's different a pilot's checklist for anything involving sequence. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Let them write it down. Making a pilot's checklist is not optional for pilots. They do it for every single flight. I just simply cannot follow long strings of verbal information. We got to stretch these kids, and we need to be providing lots of hands-on activity. Limit video games, and we'll go on to my last slide. that I really want you to think about. What's the ultimate goal of education? Where is a student 10 years after graduation? I spent 25 years in really heavy commercial construction on these large factories. And one of the things I've learned from being involved with making things, designing something where I'd sell a job, I would draw it up, I'd supervise its construction, then I had to start up and make it work. Construction's all about finishing things. Where is that student 10 years after high school? 10 years after high school, I had my master's degree, and I was building those DipVat projects. I can think of a lot of places I would not want a student to go. We got to start thinking a lot more long-term. Where's the kid 10 years later? I want you to ponder that. It's now exactly time for me to end my talk. And thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to questions this afternoon.